The radio crackled to life just as Detective Rodriguez was finishing her morning coffee. She had been on the force for 12 years, and she thought she had seen everything. But the call that came through that Tuesday morning would change everything. She believed about human nature. "We have a situation at the old Millfield train station," the dispatcher's voice cut through the static. "Woman found tied up. Caller says she's alive but needs immediate assistance." Rodriguez grabbed her keys and headed out. The drive to Millfield Station took 20 minutes through winding country roads. She had driven past this place countless times over the years, watching it slowly decay after the railway company shut it down 5 years ago. What used to be a bustling hub connecting small towns to the city had become nothing more than a forgotten relic, covered in graffiti and surrounded by overgrown weeds. As she pulled into the cracked parking lot, Rodriguez noticed a blue Honda Civic sitting near the old platform. The car looked out of place in this abandoned setting. Its paint was still shiny, and there were no signs of damage. Even stranger, the keys were dangling from the ignition, and the driver's door was slightly open as if someone had left in a hurry. The train station itself was a sad sight. What once had been a beautiful brick building with large windows and ornate details was now covered in colorful but crude graffiti. Broken bottles littered the ground, and tall grass grew through cracks in the concrete platform. The old wooden benches were weathered and stained, and most of the windows were either broken or boarded up. Rodriguez walked carefully across the platform, her footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. That's when she saw her. A woman in her mid-30s was sitting on one of the old benches, her hands free now, but showing clear marks where rope had been. She was wearing a simple blue dress and white sneakers, clothes that suggested she had been dressed for a normal day, not whatever ordeal had brought her here. The woman looked up as Rodriguez approached. Her name was Elena, as Rodriguez would later learn, and her dark eyes held a mixture of fear and confusion that made the detective's heart sink. Elena's black hair was disheveled, and there were tear stains on her cheeks, but she appeared to be physically unharmed aside from the rope. Burns on her wrists. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Rodriguez," she said gently, crouching down to Elena's eye level. "You're safe now. Can you tell me what happened?" Elena stared at her for a long moment as if trying to process the question. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The twins," she said, her words coming out shaky and uncertain. They said to take him. He's dying." Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. "Who's dying? Can you tell me more about these twins?" But Elena just shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. She kept repeating fragments of sentences that didn't make complete sense. "Take my husband," she would mumble, then, "he's dying," and then the twins said. It was like she was stuck in a loop, replaying some traumatic conversation over and over in her mind. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later, followed by the crime scene team. While the paramedics checked Elena for injuries, Rodriguez began examining the scene. The rope that had been used to tie Elena was still there, coiled on the ground next to the bench. It was ordinary rope, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. There were no obvious fingerprints on the weathered wood of the bench, and the ground was too hard and covered with debris to show clear footprints. What struck Rodriguez as odd was how clean the scene was otherwise. If someone had been held here against their will, there should have been signs of a struggle. But everything seemed almost arranged. The rope was neatly coiled. Elena's purse was sitting undisturbed on the bench beside where she had been tied, and even her car keys were still in the ignition of her Honda Dot as the paramedics helped Elena into the ambulance. Rodriguez took one more look around the abandoned station. The late morning sun was filtering through the broken roof of the old waiting area, creating strange patterns of light and shadow on the cracked walls. She noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt near the main road, but they could have belonged to anyone. The Honda Civic yielded few clues. Elena's driver's license was in her wallet, along with credit cards and a few family photos. There was a hospital parking pass on the dashboard, dated from just 2 days ago. In the glove compartment, Rodriguez found insurance papers and registration. Documents, all perfectly normal. But in the back seat, she discovered something that made her pause. a crumpled piece of paper with an address written on it in neat handwriting. The address was for this very train station. At the hospital. Elena was more coherent but still deeply shaken. She sat in the emergency room bed, her hands wrapped in bandages to treat the rope burns, staring out the window at the parking lot below. When Rodriguez tried to ask her questions about how she had ended up at the station, Elena's answers were frustratingly vague. "I remember driving," Elena said slowly, her voice still soft and uncertain. "I was supposed to meet someone, but I can't remember who or why." She touched her forehead gently, as if trying to force the memories to return. "The next thing I knew, I was tied to that bench, and these two women were standing in front of me." "Can you describe these women?" Rodriguez asked, pulling out her notepad. Elena closed her eyes, concentrating. "They looked exactly the same, like identical twins. Both had long blonde hair and were wearing dark clothing. They spoke in a strange way, like they were sharing thoughts." She opened her eyes and looked directly at Rodriguez. "They kept talking about my husband and how he was running out of time." The mention of a husband made Rodriguez's detective instincts kick in. "Where is your husband now? Is he safe?" "He's here," Elena said, gesturing vaguely toward the rest of the hospital. "Room 314. He's been sick for a long time." Her voice cracked slightly. "The doctors say he doesn't have much time left." As Rodriguez left Elena's room, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to this story than a simple kidnapping. The pieces didn't fit together properly. Why would someone tie Elena up just to leave her at an abandoned train station? Why didn't they take her purse or car? And what did these mysterious twins want with Elena's dying husband? The old train station had always been a place where people said goodbye, where families were separated by distance and time. Now it seemed to have become the setting for a different kind of goodbye, one that Rodriguez was only beginning to understand. As she walked down the hospital corridor toward room 314, she had no idea that she was about to uncover a story that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, desperation, and the lengths people will go to protect the ones they care about most. Detective Rodriguez was reviewing the case files at her desk the next morning when the front desk officer called her extension. "There are two women here who say they have information about the train station incident," he said, his voice carrying a note of curiosity. "They claim they're the ones who found the victim and called for help." Rodriguez looked up from her paperwork, surprised. In all her years on the force, witnesses rarely came forward this quickly, especially in cases this strange. Most people preferred to stay anonymous when possible. She grabbed her coffee mug and headed to the front lobby, expecting to meet two Good Samaritans who had stumbled upon Elena by accident. What she found instead made her stop in her tracks. Two women stood near the reception desk, and at first glance Rodriguez thought she was seeing double. They were identical in every possible way. Both appeared to be in their early 30s, with the same shoulder-length blonde hair styled in exactly the same way. They wore similar dark blue blazers over white blouses, and even their posture was identical. They stood with their weight shifted to their left feet, hands clasped in front of them in precisely the same manner. "I'm Detective Rodriguez," she said, walking toward them. "I understand you have information about what happened at Millfield Station yesterday." The woman on the left smiled and extended her hand. "I'm Maya," she said in a clear, confident voice. "And this is my sister Zara." The woman on the right nodded and offered the same polite smile, but said nothing. "We're the ones who found the poor woman tied up," Maya continued. "We felt terrible about what happened to her, so we wanted to make sure you had all the information you needed to catch whoever did this awful thing." Rodriguez gestured toward the interview room. "Please, let's sit down and talk about what you saw." As they walked down the hallway, Rodriguez noticed something unsettling. The twins moved in perfect synchronization. When Maya stepped with her left foot, Zara stepped with her left foot. When Maya brushed her hair behind her ear, Zara did the same motion with the exact same timing. It was like watching a perfectly rehearsed dance, but it seemed completely unconscious on their part. In the interview room, The twins sat down across from Rodriguez, again mirroring each other's movements exactly. Maya placed her hands flat on the table, and Zara did the same. When Maya crossed her legs, Zara followed suit immediately. "Let's start from the beginning," Rodriguez said, opening her notepad. "What were you doing at the train station yesterday?" "We were driving back from visiting our grandmother in Riverside," Maya answered. "We take that route every Tuesday to avoid the highway traffic." "The road goes right past the old station," Zara added, speaking for the first time. Her voice was identical to Maya's, not just in tone, but in the way she pronounced each word. "We saw a car in the parking lot," Maya continued, as if picking up exactly where her sister had left off. "It seemed strange because nobody ever goes there anymore. So we decided to check if someone needed help," Zara finished. Rodriguez wrote down their account, but something felt off about the way they told their story. It was too smooth, too practiced. Real witnesses usually fumbled with details, forgot things, or told events out of order. But Maya and Zara delivered their story like they had rehearsed it multiple times. "When you found Elena, what exactly did you see?" Rodriguez asked. "She was tied to one of the old benches," Maya said. "The poor thing was crying and seemed very confused. We untied her immediately," Zara added. "The rope was tight and her wrists were already showing marks." "Did she say anything to you while you were helping her?" The twins exchanged a quick glance and Rodriguez caught it. It was the first time their perfect synchronization had broken, just for a split second. "She kept talking about her husband," Maya said carefully. "Something about him being sick." "And she mentioned twins," Zara added, which made Rodriguez look up sharply from her notes. "She mentioned twins? What exactly did she say?" Maya shifted slightly in her seat. She was very upset and not making much sense. "She kept saying something like, 'the twins said,' but we couldn't understand what she meant." Rodriguez felt her detective instincts kicking in. Elena had mentioned twins yesterday at the hospital, and now these two identical women were claiming they found her. The coincidence seemed too convenient. "After you untied her, what happened next?" "We called 911 immediately," Zara said. "Then we stayed with her until you arrived. But you left before I got there?" Another quick glance between the sisters. "We didn't want to interfere with the investigation," Maya explained. "We saw the police car arriving, so we left to give you space to work." Rodriguez nodded but made a mental note to check the 911 call records. Something about their timeline didn't add up. When she had arrived at the station, Elena was alone, and there had been no sign of anyone else being there recently. "Can I get contact information for both of you, in case we need to follow up with more questions?" Maya reached into her purse and pulled out 2 business cards, handing them to Rodriguez. They were simple white cards with just names and phone numbers. No business name, no address, no job titles. Just Maya Petrov and Zara Petrov with local phone numbers. "What do you both do for work?" Rodriguez asked. "We're consultants," Maya said. "We help families during difficult times," Zara added. "What kind of consulting?" The twins exchanged another look, and this time Rodriguez was certain they were communicating something without words. "End-of-life planning," Maya said finally. "We help people navigate the practical and emotional challenges when someone they love is dying." Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. Elena's husband was dying, and now 2 women who specialized in death-related services had supposedly found her tied up at an abandoned train station. The coincidences were piling up too quickly. "That must be emotionally challenging work," Rodriguez said, watching their reactions carefully. "It can be," Zara said. "But we find it rewarding to help families during their darkest moments." "We understand what it's like to lose someone you love," Maya added. "And for the first time?" Both women looked genuinely sad. As the interview continued, Rodriguez noticed more strange behaviors. The twins seemed to know things about Elena that they shouldn't have known from a brief encounter at the train station. They mentioned that she had been at the hospital recently, that her husband's condition was serious, and that the family was struggling financially. When Rodriguez asked how they knew these details, they claimed Elena had told them while they were untying her, but Elena had been in shock yesterday. barely able to speak coherently. It seemed unlikely she would have shared personal family information with complete strangers in those circumstances. After the twins left, Rodriguez sat alone in the interview room, reviewing her notes. Their story had holes in it, but she couldn't prove they were lying yet. She needed to verify their timeline, check the 911 call records, and most importantly, talk to Elena again about exactly what had happened at that train station. Something told her that Maya and Zara Petrov were much more involved in this case than they were letting on. The question was whether they were good Samaritans who happened to work in a field related to Elena's situation, or whether their appearance at the station was part of something much more sinister. Rodriguez picked up her phone to call the hospital. She needed to hear Elena's side of the story again, and this time she would ask specifically about two blonde women who claimed to help people during their darkest moments. Detective Rodriguez drove back to the hospital that afternoon with more questions than answers. The meeting with the twins had left her feeling uneasy, and she needed to hear Elena's story again. This time she would ask the right questions. She found Elena sitting in a chair beside her husband's hospital bed, holding his hand while he slept. The man looked much older than his wife, his face gaunt and pale from months of illness. Machines beeped softly around them, monitoring his vital signs and delivering medication through tubes connected to his arm. Elena looked up when Rodriguez entered the room. Her eyes were red from crying, but she seemed more alert than she had been the day before. The rope burns on her wrists were healing, covered now with clean white bandages. "How are you feeling today?" Rodriguez asked gently, pulling up another chair. Elena managed a weak smile. "Better, thank you. The doctors say the physical injuries will heal quickly. It's everything else that's harder to deal with." Rodriguez glanced at the sleeping man. "Your husband?" "David," Elena said softly. "We've been married for 8 years. He was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago, and we've been fighting it ever since." Her voice broke slightly. "The doctors say he has maybe 2 weeks left." The detective felt her heart sink. Watching someone you love die slowly was one of the worst experiences imaginable. She had seen how it destroyed families, both emotionally and financially. "Elena, I need to ask you some more questions about what happened yesterday. I know it's difficult, but I met with 2 women today who claim they found you at the station." Elena's grip tightened on her husband's hand. "The twins?" "Yes, Maya and Zara Petrov. They say they untied you and called for help." Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring at her husband's peaceful face. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "They didn't save me, detective. They're the reason I was there in the first place." Rodriguez leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" Elena took a shaky breath. 3 days ago, they approached me in the hospital cafeteria. I was having lunch alone while David was getting treatment upstairs. They just walked up to my table and sat down like we were old friends. What did they want? At first, they seemed so kind and understanding. They said they knew what I was going through, that they had helped other families in similar situations. They knew things about our medical bills, about how much we owed, about David's condition. I don't know how they found out all that information." Rodriguez made notes while Elena spoke, but she kept her attention focused on the woman's face. Elena was telling the truth. She was certain of it. "They said they could help us," Elena continued. "They had a solution to all our problems. The medical debt, the stress, the pain of watching David suffer, they could make it all go away." "What kind of solution?" Elena looked directly at Rodriguez, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and fear. "They wanted us to fake David's death." The words hung in the air between them. Rodriguez had investigated insurance fraud cases before, but this felt different. More personal, more desperate. They said they knew people who could create fake death certificates, forge documents, make it look like David had died in the hospital. I would collect the life insurance money, and David could disappear to some kind of private facility where he could live out his remaining time in comfort, without the stress of medical bills or insurance battles. Rodriguez felt pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. "But you said no." "Of course I said no." Elena's voice rose, then she quickly looked at her sleeping husband and lowered it again. I could never do something like that. Even if we're broke, even if we lose everything, I won't spend David's last days living a lie. How did they react when you refused? Elena shuddered. They weren't angry exactly, but they became different. Cold. Maya told me I was being selfish, that I was choosing my own moral comfort over David's suffering. Zara said I had 24 hours to reconsider. And then what happened? I didn't hear from them for 2 days. I thought maybe they had given up and moved on to some other family. But yesterday morning I got a text message from an unknown number. It just had an address and a time. When I looked up the address, it was for the old train station. Rodriguez checked her notes. Did you recognize the address? Is that how you knew where to go? Elena nodded. I thought maybe they wanted to meet there to discuss things one more time. I know it sounds stupid now, but I hoped I could convince them to leave us alone. David doesn't even know they approached me. He has enough to worry about without adding this stress. So you drove to the station to meet them? Yes, but when I got there, something felt wrong immediately. The place was so isolated and creepy. I should have left right away, but then I saw their car parked behind the building. I thought they were already there waiting for me. Elena paused, touching her bandaged wrists. I remember walking onto the platform, looking around for them. Then I felt something hit me in the back of the head. Not hard enough to knock me unconscious, but enough to make me dizzy and confused. When my vision cleared, I was sitting on that bench with my hands tied behind my back. And the twins were there? They were standing in front of me, still looking perfectly calm and professional. Maya said they were disappointed in my decision. Zara said they had hoped I would be more reasonable. Rodriguez felt anger building in her chest. These women had kidnapped Elena and tied her up just to make some kind of twisted point. What did they say to you while you were tied up? Elena closed her eyes as if trying to block out the memory. They talked about David like he was already dead. They kept saying things like, "Take my husband, he's dying anyway," and "Why make him suffer when there's another way?" They made it sound like keeping him alive was cruel, like I was being selfish by wanting to spend his last days together honestly. How long were you there with them? Maybe an hour? They weren't violent or threatening exactly, but being tied up and helpless while they talked about David dying was terrifying. They kept asking me to reconsider their offer, saying it wasn't too late to change my mind. Then what happened? How did you get untied? Elena opened her eyes and looked confused. That's the strange part. They just left. Maya said they had given me plenty to think about, and Zara untied my hands. They walked away like nothing had happened, like tying someone up was just a normal business meeting. Rodriguez frowned. They untied you and just left you there? I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, trying to process what had happened. I was too scared to move at first, thinking maybe they were watching from somewhere. Finally, I got up and went to my car, but I was shaking too badly to drive. That's when you found me. The detective reviewed her notes, trying to make sense of the timeline. If Elena was telling the truth, then the twins had lied about finding her already tied up. They had been the ones who tied her up in the first place. Elena, this is very important. Do you think they'll try to contact you again? Elena looked at her sleeping husband, then back at Rodriguez. I don't know, but I'm scared they will. David is getting weaker every day, and our medical bills keep growing. Part of me wonders if maybe they're right, if there might be another way to handle this that would be better for everyone. Don't even think about that, Rodriguez said firmly. What they're doing is illegal, and it's wrong. Nobody should have to choose between being honest and taking care of someone they love. As Rodriguez left the hospital room, she knew she needed to dig deeper into Maya and Zara Petrov's background. Elena's story painted them as sophisticated criminals who targeted vulnerable families during their darkest moments. The question now was how many other families they had approached, and whether Elena would be strong enough to resist their pressure if they came back. Detective Rodriguez spent the next morning digging into the backgrounds of Maya and Zara Petrov, but what she found made no sense at all. According to every database she checked, The two women simply didn't exist. She started with the basic searches that usually yielded immediate results. Social security numbers came back as invalid. Birth certificates couldn't be found in any state registry. Driver's licenses showed no records under those names. Even their business cards led nowhere when she tried to trace the phone numbers back to any official registration. "This is impossible," Rodriguez muttered to herself, staring at her computer screen. In today's world, everyone left digital footprints. Credit cards, bank accounts, employment records, tax filings, social media profiles. But Maya and Zara Petrov had somehow managed to avoid creating any official trace of their existence. She decided to try a different approach. If the twins were running some kind of insurance fraud scheme, they would need to operate somewhere. Rodriguez called her contact at the State Insurance Fraud Division and asked them to run a search for any suspicious death claims involving families with terminal illness cases. While waiting for that information, she decided to visit the 3 major hospitals in the area. If the twins were targeting families dealing with serious medical situations, they would need to find their victims somewhere. Hospitals were the most logical hunting ground. Her first stop was Metropolitan General, where Yelena's husband David was currently a patient. Rodriguez spoke with the head of security, a former police officer named Captain Williams who had worked hospital security for 15 years. "I need to see your visitor logs and security footage for the past month," Rodriguez explained. "I'm looking for 2 identical blonde women who might have been visiting terminal patients." Williams pulled up the digital visitor system on his computer. "What are their names?" "Maya and Zara Petrov, but they might be using fake identities." After 20 minutes of searching through records, Williams shook his head. "No Petrovs in our system. But let me show you something interesting." He pulled up security footage from the main lobby, fast-forwarding through several days of recordings. "We've been noticing these 2 women for about 3 weeks now. They come in separately, never together, but they look identical. They always dress professionally and carry clipboards like they work here." Rodriguez watched the grainy footage as Williams pointed out the 2 figures. Even on the low-quality security camera, their resemblance was unmistakable. They moved through the hospital corridors with confidence, like they belonged there. "Where do they go when they're here?" "That's what's strange," Williams said. "They visit different floors each time. Oncology, cardiac intensive care, hospice wing. Always the floors where people are seriously ill or dying. Do they sign in as visitors?" "They should, but somehow they keep getting past the front desk. My staff swears they check everyone, but these 2 seem to slip through somehow." Rodriguez asked Williams to copy the security footage to a flash drive. As she prepared to leave, he mentioned something that made her blood run cold. "Detective, we've had 3 families this month report that their loved ones' final arrangements were handled by people they never hired. In each case, the families said 2 women had approached them offering help, but they never agreed to any services." "What kind of arrangements?" "Death certificates filed, funeral homes contacted, insurance claims started. All done professionally, but without the family's permission. When the families tried to contact the women who had helped them, the phone numbers didn't work anymore." Rodriguez felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together. "Do you have the names of those families?" Williams handed her a file. "Mrs. Chun in room 405 might be willing to talk. Her husband passed away last week, and she's been very upset about how his death was handled." Rodriguez found Mrs. Chun in the family waiting area, surrounded by sympathy cards and looking exhausted. The elderly woman was happy to talk, though her story was heartbreaking. "2 lovely young women approached me while my husband was in his final days," Mrs. Chun explained. "They said they specialized in helping families during difficult times. They seemed so kind and professional." "What did they offer to do?" "They said they could handle all the paperwork and arrangements after my husband passed, so I wouldn't have to worry about anything during my grief. They gave me their business cards and said there would be no charge for their services." Rodriguez showed Mrs. Chun the security footage on her phone. "Are these the women?" Mrs. Chun nodded immediately. "Yes, that's them. Maya and Zara. They were always together, like a match set." "What happened after your husband died?" That's when things got strange. They appeared at the hospital within hours of his passing, even though I hadn't called them. They had death certificates already prepared, and they knew details about our insurance policy that I had never told them. Rodriguez felt her detective instincts screaming. Did they ask you to sign anything? Several documents? They said it was just standard paperwork for the funeral home and insurance company. I was so upset about losing my husband that I just signed whatever they put in front of me. Do you have copies of what you signed? Mrs. Chun shook her head sadly. They said they would mail me copies, but I never received anything. When I tried to call them a few days later to ask about the arrangements, both phone numbers were disconnected. Rodriguez visited 2 more hospitals that afternoon and found similar stories. Security footage at both facilities showed the same 2 women visiting terminal patients. Hospital staff remembered them as polite and professional, but no one could explain how they had gotten past security protocols. At Riverside Medical Center, Rodriguez discovered something even more disturbing. The twins had visited a total of 12 families over the past 6 weeks. In every case, they had approached families dealing with terminal illness and overwhelming medical bills. Dr. Patricia Vance, the head of the oncology department, pulled Rodriguez aside after reviewing the security footage. I remember those 2, Dr. Vance said. They claimed to be grief counselors from some nonprofit organization. They asked me for a list of families who might benefit from their services. Did you give them any information? Absolutely not. Patient. Information is confidential. But they seem to know things about our patients anyway. They mentioned specific diagnoses, treatment costs, insurance situations, information they shouldn't have had access to. Rodriguez spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing hospital records and security footage. The pattern was clear. Maya and Zara systematically targeted families facing terminal illness and financial ruin. They gained access to private medical facilities, gathered confidential information, and approached vulnerable people during their most desperate moments. But the most troubling discovery came when Rodriguez finally received the insurance fraud report she had requested. Over the past year, there had been 17 cases of suspicious death claims involving terminal patients. In each case, the death certificates had been filed by unknown individuals, and the insurance payouts had been processed unusually quickly. The fraud investigator, Detective Mike Torres, met with Rodriguez at the police station that evening to review the cases. These aren't random insurance scams, Torres explained, spreading files across the conference table. This is a sophisticated operation targeting specific types of victims. The perpetrators have inside knowledge of medical facilities, access to official document templates, and connections with corrupt funeral homes and insurance adjusters. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate? About $2 million in fraudulent payouts over 12 months. But here's the really disturbing part. Torres pulled out a map and marked locations with red pins. All 17 cases happen within a 50-mile radius of this area. These people are operating locally, and they're getting more aggressive. Rodriguez stared at the map, thinking about Elena and David. What happens to the families after the insurance money is paid out? Torres looked grim. That's what we're trying to figure out. Some families seem genuinely grateful for the help they received. Others have tried to contact the twins later and found that they've completely disappeared. And in 3 cases, the supposedly dead husbands have never been found. As Rodriguez drove home that night, she couldn't stop thinking about Elena's words. Part of me wonders if maybe they're right. The twins weren't just running an insurance scam. They were psychological predators who exploited people's love for their dying family members. They offered hope to families who had run out of options, then twisted that hope into something criminal and dangerous. The question now was whether Elena would be strong enough to resist their offer when they inevitably returned, because Rodriguez was certain of one thing: Maya and Zara Petrov weren't finished with Elena and David yet. Detective Rodriguez returned to the hospital the next morning, determined to get more answers. But this time she wanted to speak with David while Elena was away. Something about the timeline still bothered her, and she had a feeling that Elena might not know the whole story. She found David awake and alone in his room, staring out the window at the parking lot below. He looked frailer than he had 2 days ago, his cheeks more sunken and his breathing more labored. But his eyes were alert and focused when she introduced herself. "Elena told me you're investigating what happened to her," David said, his voice weak but clear. "I'm glad someone is taking this seriously." Rodriguez pulled up a chair beside his bed. "I need to ask you some questions that might be difficult, David. It's about the 2 women who approached Elena." David's expression didn't change, but Rodriguez noticed his hands tighten slightly on the hospital blanket. "What about them?" "Elena says she never told you about their offer. Is that true?" David was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on something outside the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Detective, I've been dying for 2 years. In that time, you learn to pay attention to things you might have missed before. You notice when your wife comes home from the hospital looking more worried than usual. You see the bills piling up on the kitchen table that she tries to hide from you. You hear her crying in the bathroom when she thinks you're sleeping." Rodriguez waited patiently while David gathered his strength to continue. 3 days ago, Elena came home from the hospital acting strange. She was distracted, kept looking at her phone, and barely touched her dinner. That night I heard her pacing in the living room until almost dawn. I knew something had happened, but she wouldn't talk about it. "So you confronted her?" David shook his head weakly. "I didn't have to. The next morning my phone rang. It was one of them, Maya, I think. She said they had spoken with Elena, but that my wife was being unreasonable about their offer." Rodriguez felt her heart rate increase. "They called you directly?" "Maya told me they specialized in helping families like ours. She knew everything, Detective. How much we owed in medical bills, what our insurance policy was worth, even details about my prognosis that Elena and I had never shared with anyone outside of our medical team." "What did she say exactly?" David closed his eyes, as if the memory was painful. "She said Elena was being selfish by refusing their help. That I was suffering unnecessarily because my wife was too proud to accept their solution. She made it sound like Elena was choosing her own moral comfort over my well-being." Rodriguez thought about Elena's emotional state when describing the twins' pressure tactics. They were experts at psychological manipulation, finding exactly the right words to create doubt and guilt. "How did you respond?" "I hung up on her, but she called back an hour later. This time it was Zara, and she took a different approach. She was gentler, more understanding. She said they weren't trying to pressure anyone, they just wanted to make sure I understood all my options." David opened his eyes and looked directly at Rodriguez. "Detective, when you're dying, and you're watching the person you love most in the world sacrifice everything trying to save you, you start to question what's really the right thing to do. Did you agree to meet with them?" "Not exactly. But I didn't say no either. Zara said they would give Elena some time to think about it, but that they hoped I might help her see reason. She gave me a phone number and said to call if I wanted to discuss things privately." Rodriguez wrote down the information, though she suspected the number would lead nowhere, just like the business cards. "Did you call them?" David's silence stretched on for several minutes. Outside his window, Rodriguez could see Elena walking across the parking lot, returning from the cafeteria with coffee and what looked like a muffin she probably wouldn't eat. "I almost did," David finally admitted. "Yesterday morning, after Elena left for work, I stared at that phone number for 2 hours. Our savings are gone, Detective. We've borrowed money from Elena's parents, from my brother, from friends. The medical bills keep coming, and my insurance covers less and less each month. But you didn't call?" "I picked up the phone 3 different times. I even dialed 6 of the 7 digits once before hanging up." David's voice cracked slightly. "The thought of Elena living in debt for years after I'm gone, struggling to pay for treatments that didn't even save me, it's almost unbearable." Rodriguez understood the impossible position David was in. Love sometimes meant making choices that felt wrong to protect the people you cared about. What changed your mind? "Elena came home for lunch that day. She does that sometimes now to spend more time with me." She brought me soup from that little deli we used to go to when we were dating, and she sat right here in this chair telling me about a funny conversation she'd had with one of her coworkers. David smiled weakly at the memory. She was trying so hard to act normal, to make everything seem like it was going to be okay. But I could see how exhausted she was, how scared. And I realized that what the twins were offering wasn't really about helping us. It was about taking away the time we have left together. How do you mean? If I disappeared, even to some comfortable facility somewhere, Elena would have to spend whatever time I have left living a lie. She'd have to pretend to grieve for me, while knowing I was still alive somewhere. She'd have to lie to our families, our friends, everyone we care about. David paused, breathing heavily from the effort of talking for so long. Those women don't understand that dying isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Living without honor, without truth, without the people you love by your side, that's worse than dying. Rodriguez felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. David's words carried the weight of someone who had truly grappled with mortality and come to terms with what mattered most. But then Elena was kidnapped and tied up at that train station. You must have been terrified when Elena didn't come. Home from running errands that afternoon, I knew something was wrong. She never goes anywhere without telling me exactly where she'd be and when she'd be back. When the hospital called to say you had found her at the train station, I was afraid the twins had decided to escalate their pressure tactics. Rodriguez looked up as Elena appeared in the doorway, holding her coffee and looking surprised to see the detective there. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, Elena said, though Rodriguez could see concern in her eyes. Actually, your timing is perfect, Rodriguez said. David was just helping me understand the full timeline of events. Elena sat down in the other chair, reaching automatically for David's hand. Have you been telling the detective about the phone calls? Rodriguez looked between them. You knew about the calls? Elena nodded. David told me about them yesterday evening after you left. We decided we should be completely honest with you about everything that happened. Why didn't you mention them when I interviewed you yesterday? Because I was embarrassed, Elena said quietly. I was afraid you'd think David had been considering their offer seriously, or that maybe I hadn't been clear enough in refusing them. David squeezed his wife's hand. Elena has been protecting me throughout this whole ordeal, Detective. She's been carrying the burden of their pressure tactics alone because she didn't want to add to my stress. But after what happened at the train station, we both realized this was bigger than just our situation. Rodriguez closed her notebook and looked at the couple. Their love for each other was evident in every glance, every gesture, every word they spoke. The twins had tried to exploit that love, to turn it into something that would serve their criminal purposes. David, Elena, I want you both to know that what the twins are doing is not just illegal, it's predatory. They're experts at finding people in vulnerable situations and making them feel like they have no choice but to accept help that comes with terrible strings attached. Elena looked worried. Do you think they'll try to contact us again? Rodriguez wished she could reassure them, but her investigation had shown her that Maya and Zara Petrov didn't give up easily. I think it's possible they will, but now we're prepared for them. And more importantly, you two are united in knowing exactly what you want, to spend whatever time David has left together, honestly, surrounded by the people who love you. As Rodriguez left the hospital room, she felt a renewed determination to stop the twins before they could hurt anyone else. David and Elena had found the strength to resist their manipulation, but other families might not be so fortunate. Detective Rodriguez knew she needed help to take down an operation this sophisticated. The next morning, she contacted the FBI's white-collar crime unit and requested a meeting with Special Agent Lisa Park, who specialized in large-scale insurance fraud cases. Agent Park arrived at the police station 2 hours later with a thick file folder and a laptop full of data that made Rodriguez realized just how deep this case went. We've been tracking Maya and Zara Petrov for 8 months. Agent Park explained, spreading photographs and documents across the conference table. But those aren't their real names. We believe they're actually sisters named Chloe and Amber. Right, originally from Oregon? Rodriguez studied the photographs. The women looked identical to the twins she had interviewed, but these photos showed them with different hair colors and styles. How did you connect them to our case? The insurance fraud patterns. Your local investigation triggered alerts in our national database. What you've uncovered here is just one branch of a much larger network that operates across 12 states. Agent Park opened her laptop and showed Rodriguez a map of the United States with red dots scattered across multiple states. Each dot represents a location where we've documented similar insurance fraud cases involving families with terminal illness. The pattern is always the same. Two women approach grieving families, offer to help with arrangements, then manipulate the situation to generate fraudulent insurance payouts. How many families are we talking about? At least 200 that we can document, probably many more that haven't been reported. The total financial damage is estimated at over $15 million. Rodriguez felt sick thinking about all the families who had been exploited during their most vulnerable moments. How does their network actually work? Agent Park pulled out an organizational chart that looked like something from a corporate presentation. It's remarkably sophisticated. The Wright sisters are just the front-facing operatives. Behind them is a network of corrupt funeral directors, insurance adjusters, document forgers, and medical records clerks who provide inside information. Medical records clerks? That's how they know so much about their targets before approaching them. They have people working inside hospitals who provide confidential patient information, diagnoses, prognoses, insurance details, family financial situations. Armed with that information, they can approach families and seem incredibly knowledgeable and caring. Rodriguez thought about how the twins had known details about David's condition and Elena's financial struggles that should have been private. So, when they approached Elena in the hospital cafeteria, they already knew everything about her situation. Exactly. They don't choose victims randomly. They target families who meet specific criteria: terminal diagnosis with short life expectancy, significant medical debt, life insurance policies worth at least $200,000, and no close extended family who might ask too many questions. Agent Park showed Rodriguez a flowchart that detailed the entire operation. Once they identify a target family, they spend days or weeks studying their routines, their emotional state, their financial desperation. Then they approach with an offer that seems perfectly tailored to solve all their problems. What happens to the families who agree to participate? That depends on how cooperative they are and how much money is involved. In some cases, the husband actually does disappear to a facility somewhere, and the family receives a portion of the insurance payout. But we've also found cases where the supposedly dead husband was never seen again after the fake death was staged. Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. You mean they might actually be killing people? We don't have proof yet, but we have 3 cases where families agreed to the fake death scheme, received their insurance money, then tried to contact the facility where their loved one was supposedly living. In each case, the facility didn't exist and the husbands were never found. Agent Park pulled out photos of 3 men who had supposedly died but whose bodies had never been recovered. Robert Sheehan from California, Thomas Wilson from Nevada, and James Martinez from Arizona. All 3 were terminally ill, all 3 families worked with the Wright sisters, and all 3 men vanished completely after their fake deaths were staged. The families think their husbands are living comfortably somewhere, but they might actually be dead. That's our fear. The Wright sisters may have realized that actually keeping terminally ill people alive was expensive and complicated. It might be easier to just eliminate them after collecting the insurance money. Rodriguez thought about David lying in his hospital bed, weak but still fighting to spend every possible moment with Elena. The idea that someone would cut that time short for money made her angry in a way that surprised her. How do we stop them? Agent Park smiled grimly. That's where your case becomes crucial. Elena and David refused to participate, which makes them witnesses rather than co-conspirators. Most of our other victims were willing participants who can't testify against the network without incriminating themselves. But Elena was kidnapped and tied up, That gives us leverage. Exactly. Kidnapping is a federal crime, and it shows that the Wright sisters are willing to use force when their psychological manipulation doesn't work. If we can arrest them for kidnapping Elena, we can use that case to pressure them into revealing the rest of their network. Agent Park explained that the FBI had been watching the twins for months but hadn't been able to gather enough evidence to make arrests. Most of their victims were either willing participants or too ashamed to come forward. Elena's case was different because she had been victimized rather than recruited. The challenge is that Maya and Zara are extremely careful about covering their tracks. They use burner phones, fake identities, and cash payments. They never stay in one location long enough to establish patterns that we can predict. Rodriguez thought about something that had been bothering her. The abandoned train station where Elena was taken. That wasn't random, was it? Definitely not. We think they choose locations that have psychological significance. Train stations represent departures, goodbyes, people leaving and never coming back. It was designed to make Elena feel abandoned and hopeless, to soften her resistance to their offer. Agent Park showed Rodriguez photos of other locations where families had been pressured: an empty cemetery, a closed children's hospital, a demolished house where an elderly couple had lived for 50 years. They're experts at psychological manipulation. Every detail is calculated to break down their target's emotional defenses. Do we know where they are now? We lost track of them 2 days ago. They checked out of a motel about an hour after Elena was found at the train station. But we don't think they've left the area yet. Agent Park pulled out surveillance photos from various locations around the city. Our analysts believe they're still watching Elena and David, waiting to see if the pressure from the kidnapping will change their minds. Terminal patients don't have time to wait, so if the Wright sisters want to close this deal, they need to act soon. Rodriguez felt a surge of protective anger toward Elena and David. So they're planning to approach them again? Almost certainly, but this time we'll be ready for them. We're going to set up surveillance around the hospital and Elena's home. When Maya and Zara make their next move, we'll be waiting. The plan was ambitious but dangerous. Elena and David would continue their normal routines while federal agents watched from hidden positions. When the twins inevitably returned to pressure them again, law enforcement would be in position to make arrests. What if something goes wrong? Rodriguez asked. What if the twins realize they're being watched and decide to escalate their tactics? Agent Park's expression was serious. That's a risk we have to take. But Elena and David are in danger anyway, as long as the Wright sisters are free. At least this way, we have a chance to protect them while gathering the evidence we need to shut down the entire network. As Rodriguez drove home that evening, she thought about the scope of what they were facing. Maya and Zara weren't just individual criminals. They were part of a sophisticated organization that preyed on families during their darkest moments. Stopping them would require courage from Elena and David, who were already dealing with more than anyone should have to bear, but Rodriguez was determined to see it through. Too many families had already been victimized by this network. Elena and David deserved the chance to spend their remaining time together in peace, without the threat of predators trying to exploit their love for each other. The surveillance operation began 3 days later, but it was Elena and David who faced the hardest part. They had to continue living their lives normally while knowing that federal agents were watching their every move, waiting for the twins to return. Elena found it almost impossible to concentrate at work. Every time her phone buzzed, every unexpected visitor to the office, every unfamiliar car in the parking lot made her heart race. She kept thinking about what Agent Park had told them about families whose loved ones had disappeared forever after agreeing to the fake death scheme. At the hospital, David's condition was getting worse rapidly. Dr. Martinez, his oncologist, pulled Elena aside after the morning rounds with news that made her world crumble even further. Elena, we need to discuss David's care going forward, Dr. Martinez said gently. His body isn't responding to the current treatment anymore, and the cancer has spread faster than we anticipated. Elena felt the familiar punch of grief that came with each setback. How much time do we have? Days, not weeks. Maybe a week at most. I'm sorry, Elena. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. Elena nodded, trying to process this new reality. She had known this moment would come, but having a specific timeline made everything feel more urgent and final. She thought about the twins and their offer, and for the first time, she understood why some families might be tempted to accept help that came with terrible strings attached. That evening, as Elena sat beside David's bed, he could see the weight of the doctor's news in her expression. "How bad is it?" David asked softly. Elena tried to smile, but tears started flowing instead. "Dr. Martinez thinks we have about a week," David nodded slowly. He had felt his body getting weaker each day, so the news wasn't entirely surprising. But hearing it out loud made it real in a way that was hard to accept. "I'm scared, David," Elena whispered. "Not just about losing you, but about everything that comes after. The bills, the debt, trying to figure out how to live without you." David reached for her hand with what little strength he had left. "We've been over this, Elena. The money doesn't matter. What matters is that we're here together, being honest about what's happening. But what if the twins were right? What if I'm being selfish by choosing my feelings over practical solutions?" Before David could answer, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her blood run cold. The message was from an unknown number. "We heard about David's prognosis. Our offer still stands. Coffee shop across from hospital." 1 hour. Elena showed the message to David, whose face immediately hardened with anger despite his weakness. "They have someone watching us," David said. "Someone told them about my appointment with Dr. Martinez today." Elena felt violated and helpless. The twins seemed to know everything about their private medical information, their financial situation, even their most intimate conversations with doctors. It felt like they had no privacy left, no safe space to process their grief without outside interference. "What should we do?" Elena asked. "We should call Detective Rodriguez right away," David said. This is exactly what she and the FBI agent were waiting for. But as Elena reached for her phone to call the police, she hesitated. Dr. Martinez had just told them David had less than a week to live. If they cooperated with the FBI investigation, David's final days would be filled with police interviews, surveillance operations, and legal proceedings. Instead of spending their last moments together in peace, they would be consumed by a criminal case. "Elena, what are you thinking?" David asked, seeing the conflict in her expression. "I'm thinking about what Dr. Martinez said. You have so little time left, and if we go through with this investigation, we'll spend all of it dealing with lawyers and agents in court proceedings." David was quiet for a moment, understanding the impossible choice Elena was facing. "You're worried that helping the investigation will take away what little time we have left." "Yes, and I'm also thinking about what the twins said, about other families who might be helped by their services. What if some people really are better off accepting their offer?" Elena knew she was rationalizing, but the exhaustion of fighting cancer for 2 years, combined with the overwhelming medical debt and the fear of facing life alone, was making her question everything she thought she believed about right and wrong. David studied his wife's face, seeing the confusion and desperation that the twins had been expert at exploiting in other families. "Elena, look at me," David said firmly. "Do you remember our wedding day? What we promised each other?" Elena smiled through her tears. "For better or worse, in sickness and in health. We didn't promise to love each other only when it was convenient or financially responsible. We promised to love each other through the hard times, the scary times, the times when doing the right thing costs more than we can afford." David's voice grew stronger despite his physical weakness. "The twins aren't offering to help us, Elena. They're offering to buy our integrity. They want us to spend my last days living a lie so they can profit from other families' suffering." Elena knew David was right, but the practical side of her mind kept calculating the numbers. The medical bills would continue coming for months. After David died, she would probably lose their house. She might have to declare bankruptcy. The thought of facing all that alone was terrifying. But what if I can't handle it all by myself? Elena whispered. You won't be by yourself, David said. You have your sister, your parents, our friends. People who love you and will help you through this without asking you to compromise your values. Elena's phone buzzed again. Another message. 30 minutes. We can make all your problems disappear tonight. David saw the message and felt a surge of anger at how the twins were pressuring Elena during the most vulnerable moment of their lives. Elena, I need you to understand something. If we go along with their plan, I don't disappear to some comfortable facility. Agent Park made it clear that some of the men in this scheme were never seen again. If we say yes to the twins, you might collect the insurance money, but you'll never see me again, and you'll never know what really happened to me. The weight of David's words hit Elena like a physical blow. She had been so focused on the financial aspects of the twins' offer that she hadn't fully processed what Agent Park had said about missing husbands. You think they would hurt you? I think they're criminals who have already shown they're willing to kidnap and threaten people. I don't trust them to keep any promises they make. Elena looked at her husband, this man who had been her partner for 8 years, who was facing death with more courage than she was facing life. She realized that the twins had been slowly poisoning her thoughts, making her doubt her own moral instincts by exploiting her love for David and her fear of the future. You're right, Elena said finally. I almost let them convince me that money was more important than spending your last days honestly together. David squeezed her hand. Call Detective Rodriguez. Tell her the twins want to meet tonight. If we're going to help stop them from hurting other families, we need to do it now, while we still can. Elena picked up her phone, but before dialing, she looked at David one more time. Are you sure you want to spend your last week dealing with all this stress? David smiled, and for a moment, Elena could see the man she had fallen in love with. Years ago, before cancer and medical bills and criminal twins had complicated their lives. Elena, the most important thing I can do with whatever time I have left is help make sure other couples don't have to face what we've been through. If we can stop the twins from exploiting other families, then my death will have meant something, beyond just being a tragedy. As Elena dialed Detective Rodriguez's number, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in weeks. The twins had tried to make her believe that love meant making compromises with criminals. But real love meant protecting other people from the predators who would exploit their most vulnerable moments. The surveillance operation began 3 days later, but it was Elena and David who faced the hardest part. They had to continue living their lives normally while knowing that federal agents were watching their every move, waiting for the twins to return. Elena found it almost impossible to concentrate at work. Every time her phone buzzed, every unexpected visitor to the office, every unfamiliar car in the parking lot made her heart race. She kept thinking about what Agent Park had told them about families whose loved ones had disappeared forever after agreeing to the fake death scheme. At the hospital, David's condition was getting worse rapidly. Dr. Martinez, his oncologist, pulled Elena aside after the morning rounds with news that made her world crumble even further. Elena, we need to discuss David's care going forward, Dr. Martinez said gently. His body isn't responding to the current treatment anymore, and the cancer has spread faster than we anticipated. Elena felt the familiar punch of grief that came with each setback. How much time do we have? Days, not weeks. Maybe a week at most. I'm sorry, Elena. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. Elena nodded, trying to process this new reality. She had known this moment would come, but having a specific timeline made everything feel more urgent and final. She thought about the twins and their offer, and for the first time, she understood why some families might be tempted to accept help that came with terrible strings attached. That evening, as Elena sat beside David's bed, he could see the weight of the doctor's news in her expression. How bad is it? David asked softly. Elena tried to smile, but tears started flowing instead. Dr. Martinez thinks we have about a week, David nodded slowly. He had felt his body getting weaker each day, so the news wasn't entirely surprising. But hearing it out loud made it real in a way that was hard to accept. I'm scared, David, Elena whispered. Not just about losing you, but about everything that comes after. The bills, the debt, trying to figure out how to live without you. David reached for her hand with what little strength he had left. We've been over this, Elena. The money doesn't matter. What matters is that we're here together, being honest about what's happening. But what if the twins were right? What if I'm being selfish by choosing my feelings over practical solutions? Before David could answer, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her blood run cold. The message was from an unknown number. We heard about David's prognosis. Our offer still stands. Coffee shop across from hospital. 1 hour. Elena showed the message to David, whose face immediately hardened with anger despite his weakness. They have someone watching us, David said. Someone told them about my appointment with Dr. Martinez today. Elena felt violated and helpless. The twins seemed to know everything about their private medical information, their financial situation, even their most intimate conversations with doctors. It felt like they had no privacy left, no safe space to process their grief without outside interference. What should we do? Elena asked. We should call Detective Rodriguez right away, David said. This is exactly what she and the FBI agent were waiting for. But as Elena reached for her phone to call the police, she hesitated. Dr. Martinez had just told them David had less than a week to live. If they cooperated with the FBI investigation, David's final days would be filled with police interviews, surveillance operations, and legal proceedings. Instead of spending their last moments together in peace, they would be consumed by a criminal case. Elena, what are you thinking? David asked, seeing the conflict in her expression. I'm thinking about what Dr. Martinez said. You have so little time left, and if we go through with this investigation, we'll spend all of it dealing with lawyers and agents and court proceedings. David was quiet for a moment, understanding the impossible choice Elena was facing. You're worried that helping the investigation will take away what little time we have left. Yes, and I'm also thinking about what the twins said, about other families who might be helped by their services. What if some people really are better off accepting their offer? Elena knew she was rationalizing, but the exhaustion of fighting cancer for 2 years, combined with the overwhelming medical debt and the fear of facing life alone, was making her question everything she thought she believed about right and wrong. David studied his wife's face, seeing the confusion and desperation that the twins had been expert at exploiting in other families. Elena, look at me, David said firmly. Do you remember our wedding day? What we promised each other, Elena smiled through her tears. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. We didn't promise to love each other only when it was convenient or financially responsible. We promised to love each other through the hard times, the scary times, the times when doing the right thing costs more than we can afford. David's voice grew stronger despite his physical weakness. The twins aren't offering to help us, Elena. They're offering to buy our integrity. They want us to spend my last days living a lie so they can profit from other families' suffering. Elena knew David was right, but the practical side of her mind kept calculating the numbers. The medical bills would continue coming for months. After David died, she would probably lose their house. She might have to declare bankruptcy. The thought of facing all that alone was terrifying. But what if I can't handle it all by myself? Elena whispered. You won't be by yourself, David said. You have your sister, your parents, our friends. People who love you and will help you through this without asking you to compromise your values. Elena's phone buzzed again. Another message. 30 minutes. We can make all your problems disappear tonight. David saw the message and felt a surge of anger at how the twins were pressuring Elena during the most vulnerable moment of their lives. Elena, I need you to understand something. If we go along with their plan, I don't disappear to some comfortable facility. Agent Park made it clear that some of the men in this scheme were never seen again. If we say yes to the twins, you might collect the insurance money, but you'll never see me again, and you'll never know what really happened to me. The weight of David's words hit Elena like a physical blow. She had been so focused on the financial aspects of the twins, offer that she hadn't fully processed what Agent Park had said about missing husbands. You think they would hurt you? I think they're criminals who have already shown they're willing to kidnap and threaten people. I don't trust them to keep any promises they make. Elena looked at her husband, this man who had been her partner for 8 years, who was facing death with more courage than she was facing life. She realized that the twins had been slowly poisoning her thoughts, making her doubt her own moral instincts by exploiting her love for David and her fear of the future. You're right, Elena said finally. I almost let them convince me that money was more important than spending your last days honestly together. David squeezed her hand. Call Detective Rodriguez. Tell her the twins want to meet tonight. If we're going to help stop them from hurting other families, we need to do it now while we still can. Elena picked up her phone, but before dialing, she looked at David one more time. Are you sure you want to spend your last week dealing with all this stress? David smiled, and for a moment, Elena could see the man she had fallen in love with. Years ago, before cancer and medical bills and criminal twins had complicated their lives. Elena, the most important thing I can do with whatever time I have left is help make sure other couples don't have to face what we've been through. If we can stop the twins from exploiting other families, then my death will have meant something. Beyond just being a tragedy. As Elena dialed Detective Rodriguez's number, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in weeks. The twins had tried to make her believe that love meant making compromises with criminals. But real love meant protecting other people from the predators who would exploit their most vulnerable moments.